My husband zipped his suitcase and told me I was not impressive enough, that he could do better. He had no idea I had secretly built a crisis management empire worth $28 million from our guest room. 2 weeks later, at his luxury birthday dinner, I did not make a toast. I projected my bank statement on the wall. That was the moment he realized the only thing he owned in our penthouse was his audacity. My name is Xenia Victoria. The phone vibrating against the mahogany nightstand shattered the silence at 3 minutes past 4 in the morning. It was a violent, persistent buzzing that felt like an insect trapped against the wood. I rolled over, the high thread count sheets cool against my skin, and stared at the screen glowing in the pitch dark. It was an unknown number with a Chicago area code. I knew exactly who it was before I even touched the glass. I let it ring twice more before pressing the speaker button. My pulse was steady. My breathing was even. I felt a terrifying sense of calm. "Please pick up," a woman's voice sobbed through the speaker. It was wet, panicked, and broken. "Please, the things that happened tonight, it is about you." I stared at the device. I did not say a word. I did not feel the urge to comfort her. I watched the seconds tick by on the digital display, listening to the jagged sound of her breathing on the other end. This was the aftermath. This was the wreckage. But to understand why I lay there in the dark, watching a stranger's panic illuminate my ceiling with a detached curiosity, you have to go back to the morning the war began. It was 10 minutes past 6 in the morning, exactly 2 weeks ago. The light filtering through the blinds was the color of wet concrete, stripping the room of any warmth. I woke up to the sound of a zipper. It was not the soft zip of a dress, but the harsh metallic teeth of luggage being sealed. My husband, Adrian Cole, was standing by the foot of the bed. He was folding his shirts. He did it with a fastidious, aggressive precision. Fold, tuck, smash. He looked like a man preparing for a holy crusade. Except his enemy was his wife who paid the rent. He was avoiding my eyes. That was the first thing I noted. He focused entirely on smoothing out the collar of a blue Oxford shirt, treating the fabric with more tenderness than he had shown me in months. "I need space, Xenia," he said. His voice was tight, rehearsed. I could tell he had practiced this speech in front of the bathroom mirror while I was sleeping. "I have been talking to the guys," he continued, finally tossing the shirt into the open suitcase. "To Tyler, to Brielle." The name hung in the air like the smell of stale smoke. Brielle Knox, the woman who wore her ambition like cheap perfume, loud and cloying. She was the one who had recently told him at a cocktail mixer that he was too vibrant to be weighed down by someone so domestic. Adrian straightened up, his back stiff. He finally looked at me, but he looked through me. "They think I can do better, and I think they might be right. You are just not really ambitious. Xenia, you are not impressive enough. I need a partner who challenges me, who operates at my level. Brielle says I am too much of a powerhouse to be anchored to someone who is content with being ordinary." I sat up. I did not pull the duvet up to cover my chest. I let the cold morning air hit my skin. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in 7 years, the lens shifted. I did not see my husband. I did not see the man I had promised to love in sickness and in health. I saw a liability. I saw a walking, breathing public relations crisis that was managing a sloppy exit strategy. I tilted my head, studying his trembling hands. He was waiting for the tears. He was conditioned to expect my softness. He was waiting for me to throw myself at his knees, to beg him to stay, to promise I would be more sparkling, more worthy of his mediocre brilliance. He wanted the drama. He wanted the ego boost of a woman shattered by his departure. "So go," I said. My voice was flat. It sounded like steel hitting pavement. There was no tremor, no moisture in my eyes. "Go and find something better then." He blinked. This was not in the script. He tossed a pair of socks into his Rimowa carry-on bag I had bought him for Christmas with unnecessary force. "I am going to stay at Tyler Briggs' place for a few days," he announced, puffing his chest out, trying to regain control of the narrative. "To think, to reevaluate what I want from a partner, I need to be around people who understand high performance. He paused, glancing at the door, then back at me, desperate for a reaction. The room remained filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of him grabbing the zipper pull. He zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. He grabbed the handle and turned toward the bedroom door, his posture radiating a self-righteous indignation. He was leaving, and he was certain that the moment the door closed, I would collapse. "Adrian," I said. He stopped, his back to me. I could see the smirk he was trying to hide reflecting in the mirror on the closet door. He thought I was breaking. He thought this was the moment the pleading began. "Before you walk out that door," I said, sliding my legs out of bed and standing up. The floorboards were ice cold against my bare feet. "There is one small thing I should mention, about my work." He let out a sigh, a long, exaggerated exhale of a martyr burdened by a dull wife. He turned around slowly, his expression one of pained patience. "Zinnia, please," he said, shaking his head. "I do not want to hear about your little freelance PR gigs right now. That is exactly the problem. It is small thinking. You are happy writing press releases for bakeries while I'm trying to structure equity deals. It is not freelance," I said. I walked over to the dresser and picked up a silk hair tie, pulling my dark hair back into a severe ponytail. I needed him to see my face clearly. I needed him to see that there was no fear there. "My company, the one I co-founded 3 years ago, the Victoria Reyes Containment Group," I said, keeping my voice conversational. He frowned, his brow furrowing. "What?" "We handle crisis management for Fortune 500 companies," I said, listing the facts as if reading from a grocery list. "Data breaches, executive scandals, international blackmail, the kind of problems that destroy stock prices if they hit the news cycle." I took a step closer to him. "Northlight Holdings acquired us yesterday afternoon." I watched the confusion ripple across his forehead. He was trying to process the words, but they did not fit into the box he had built for me. "The acquisition price was $28 million, I said. Adrian dropped the handle of his suitcase. It hit the floor with a heavy, dull thud. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "My share, after taxes and equity distribution, came into my account this morning," I continued, reaching over to brush a piece of invisible lint off the shoulder of his jacket. $16,400,000. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. I watched his eyes widen. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. The air suddenly too thin for his lungs. The arrogance drained out of his face, replaced by a pale, sick shock. He looked at the suitcase. He looked at me. He looked at the walls of the bedroom he thought he was the king of. "I just thought you should know," I said, offering him a tight, polite smile that did not reach my eyes. "Since I'm not impressive enough." He took a jerky step toward me, his hands reaching out instinctively. "Zinnia, wait, what are you talking about? 16 million? You never said—" I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "You need space. Adrian, go to Tyler's. Think about your high performance. Think about your ambition." I walked past him toward the bathroom. I could smell his cologne, a scent I used to love, now just chemical and cloying. I put my hand on the brass knob and turned back to him one last time. "Oh, and Adrian," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming almost gentle. "The lease on this apartment is in my name. The Range Rover you drove to work yesterday is in my company's name. You might want to check if you can find someone more impressive before your birthday next week." I opened the bathroom door. "I am planning a party," I added. "It will be something very special." I stepped into the bathroom and closed the door, locking it with a soft click. I stood there in the dark for a long time, listening. I heard his breathing on the other side of the wood. I heard the hesitation, and then, finally, I heard the front door close. It was not a slam. It was the quiet, terrified click of a man who just realized he had walked away from a winning lottery ticket because he thought he was too good for the paper it was printed on. The click of the bathroom lock did not end the conversation. I heard Adrian's heavy footsteps stomp back toward the bedroom door, but he did not leave. Instead, the bedroom door slammed shut, but he was still on the inside. He was not going to walk away. His ego, a fragile and ravenous thing, could not digest the sentence I had just fed it. I washed my face with cold water, drying my skin with a deliberate slowness. When I walked back into the bedroom, Adrian was standing by the window, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of pitying amusement plastered on his face. He had reconstructed his reality in the 3 minutes I had been in the bathroom. He had decided I was crazy. "You almost had me for a second," Adrian said, letting out a short, breathless laugh that sounded like a bark. $16 million. God. Xenia, I know you are hurt. I know this is a shock. But inventing a fantasy life, a fake company, that is pathological. He shook his head, looking at me with the benevolence one might show a confused child. You do freelance PR for cupcakes and local charities from the guest bedroom. I see you there. You are in your pajamas at 10 in the morning. Real CEOs do not work in sweatpants. Xenia, real companies have offices. They have boards. They do not exist on a laptop in a messy spare room. I walked past him to the small writing desk in the corner. I did not argue. Arguments are for people who need to be believed. I just needed to be understood. I opened my MacBook Air. The screen came to life, the harsh blue light cutting through the gray morning. I logged into the secure portal for Northlight Holdings, then opened a separate tab for my Chase Private Client business account. "Come here," I said. "I am not going to look at your Photoshop project," he sneered, though his feet were already moving toward me. Curiosity is the flaw in every narcissist's armor. I stepped aside. On the screen, the Northlight acquisition summary was open. It was a PDF, dense with legal language, watermarked confidential. The header read, "Acquisition agreement between Northlight Holdings and Victoria Reyes Containment Group. Date October 12th. Total consideration, $28 million. Adrian leaned in. I saw his eyes darting across the lines. He was looking for the typo. He was looking for the mistake that would prove this was a forgery. His eyes stopped at the signature block. Xenia Victoria, co-founder and chief executive officer. "Click the other tab," I said. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the trackpad. He clicked. The banking interface is loaded. The balance was in bold. Black numbers at the top of the screen. $16,400,000. $212.44. Adrian stood up straight, stumbling back half a step as if the numbers had physically shoved him. The smirk slid off his face, replaced by a slack-jawed horror that was almost comical. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "This is a glitch," he stammered. "This is a test server." "Refresh the page," I said. He did. The numbers remained. "You said you were doing freelance work," he whispered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "You said you were making $40,000 a year." "I said I was covering my bills," I corrected him. "And I covered yours, too." I reached over his shoulder and opened a folder on the desktop labeled Ledger. I opened a spreadsheet that I had maintained meticulously for the last 18 months. It was color-coded. It was brutal. "You think we live in a luxury high-rise in River North on your salary?" I asked, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. "Adrian, your salary as an associate at Halberd Ridge is $140,000 a year before taxes. The rent on this apartment is $7,500 a month. Do the math." "The rent is $2,000, he protested, his face flushing red. "You told me the landlord gave us a pandemic deal because the market was soft." "I lied," I said. "The market was never that soft. I paid the difference, $5,500, every single month, wired directly from my company account to the management firm, so you could feel like a big man living in a penthouse you could not afford." I scrolled down the spreadsheet. "And the credit cards. The Amex Platinum. You love to flash at dinners. You pay the minimum balance. You think the rest just magically disappears? I pay off the remaining balance every 30 days. That trip to Tulum you took with the boys for your bachelor party, $4,000. My company paid for it. Adrian looked sick. He looked like a man who had just realized the floor he was standing on was actually a trap door. He turned away from the computer, his eyes darting around the room, looking for something that was still his. The car, he said, latching onto the thought. My Range Rover. I will pay the lease on that. You pay $600 a month toward a lease that costs $1,900, I said. And check the registration in the glove box. Adrian, you never looked at the paperwork, did you? You just took the keys and drove it to your meeting so you could look successful. The car is registered to Victoria Reyes Containment Group. It is a company fleet vehicle. You are just an unauthorized driver. He slumped onto the edge of the bed, sitting on the very mattress where, 10 minutes ago, he had told me I was not ambitious enough. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had inverted. He was no longer the rising star leaving his dull wife behind. He was a dependent. He was a line item on my expense report that I had finally decided to cut. Why he asked, his voice cracked. He looked up at me, and for a moment, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic confusion. Why didn't you tell me I'm your husband? We are partners. You let me believe you let me walk around like an idiot. Why would you hide this? Because you cannot handle it, I said. I did not say it with anger. I said it with the clinical detachment of a diagnosis. Think about it, Adrian. Remember 3 years ago, you got a $5,000 bonus. You talked about it for 3 weeks. You made me toast to it at dinner. You made me call my parents to tell them. That same afternoon, I had closed a contract worth $600,000. If I had told you, would you have been happy for me? He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No, you would have sulked. You would have found a way to minimize it. You would have told me it was luck. You need to be the sun. Adrian, you need everyone else to be a planet orbiting you. If I shined too bright, you would have burned out. So I dimmed myself. I made myself small so you could feel big, and you repaid me by telling me I was too small to keep. He stood up again, anger flaring in his eyes. It was the defensive anger of a man who has been exposed. This is manipulation. Xenia, you entrapped me. You set me up to fail. I supported you, I said. There is a difference. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my phone. I checked the time. It was now 6:25. We are done here, I said. But before you go to Tyler's house to cry about your evil wife, I want you to know one last thing. Your birthday is next week. He blinked, thrown off by the sudden change in topic. What? I booked the private dining room at Aria Noir, I said. You know, the place you always said we would go to when you finally made it big. I originally booked a table for 2. I changed it this morning. I invited 10 people. Tyler, Mason, Lauren, Brielle, all of them. Cancel it, he said, panic rising in his chest. I am not going to a party with you now. Oh, you are going, I said, offering him a cold, sharp smile. Because if you do not show up, I will just show them the slides I prepared anyway, and I think you would prefer to be there to defend yourself. We are going to have a little presentation. I want you and your friends to help me redefine the word impressive. I walked to the front door of the apartment. I tapped the keypad on the smart lock, punching in a sequence of numbers. The mechanism whirred and beeped a confirmation tone. I just changed the master code, I said, opening the door wide. The hallway air was stale and quiet. The lease is in my name. The furniture is mine. The electronics are mine. You have your suitcase. I suggest you take it. Adrian stood in the center of the living room. He looked at the leather sofa he loved, the 70-inch television he claimed was essential for his research, the view of the Chicago skyline he posted on Instagram every week. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was a guest in his own life. He grabbed the handle of his suitcase. His knuckles were white. He walked toward the door, trying to muster some shred of dignity, trying to find a way to walk tall. But it is hard to walk tall when you have just been stripped naked. "You are cruel," he hissed as he passed me. "I am solvent," I replied. I closed the door in his face. I heard the lock engage. Then I listened to the silence of my apartment. It was expensive. It was spacious. And for the first time in 7 years, it was entirely mine. To understand how I became a ghost in my own marriage, you have to go back to the rain. It always starts with rain in stories like this, doesn't it? It washes away the red flags until all you see is the shine. We have to go back 9 years to Seattle. I was 24, fresh out of a mid-tier PR agency and desperate to prove I could survive in a city that smelled of pine and old books. I met Adrian in a cramped indie coffee shop in Capitol Hill. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too large for his shoulders, holding court at a corner table with a group of other interns. I remember watching him over the rim of my latte. He was loud. He was radiant. He was talking about market caps and equity splits with the fervor of a televangelist. When he finally noticed me, he didn't just say hello. He absorbed me. He pulled up a chair and started telling me about his future not as a possibility, but as a prophecy. He was going to run a fund. He was going to buy a house on the water. He was going to be important. I was mesmerized. I was a girl who wrote press releases for people who pretended to be important. And here was a man who believed, with every cell in his body, that he actually was. We moved to Denver 18 months later. It was the era of the grind. We rented a walk-up apartment with drafty windows and a radiator that clanged like a dying engine. Those were the years I told myself were the happiest. Though looking back, they were just the years where the terms of our contract were drafted. Adrian was studying for his CFA Level 3 exam. He was stressed, volatile, and brilliant. I was working 2 freelance contracts and a full-time remote position to cover the rent, the groceries, and his study materials. I remember coming home one night with takeout pad thai, my feet aching from a 12-hour day, and finding him surrounded by textbooks. He looked up, eyes bright with manic exhaustion, and said it for the first time. "When I make it, Xenia, you won't have to worry about a thing. I am going to take care of us. You just wait." I believed him. God, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be taken care of. So I paid the electric bill, and I bought the wine he liked, and I told myself that my exhaustion was an investment in our future. I did not realize I was investing in a future where I did not exist. Then came the wedding. We got married in a refurbished barn in the Hudson Valley. It was autumn. The leaves were turning the color of burnt sugar, and the air was crisp. It was a small ceremony because we were saving for a down payment on a house we would never buy. Standing under the wooden archway, Adrian cried. He held my hands, his palms sweating, and looked into my eyes with a vulnerability that broke me open. He recited his vows, voice trembling. "I promise to cherish you," he said. "I promise to support you, but mostly, I promise to see you. I will always really see you, Xenia." I clung to those words. I wrapped them around me like a shield. I told myself that his success was our success. I told myself that my ambition was jagged and unladylike, while his ambition was noble. I decided right then, standing in my white dress, that his feeling of being a man was more important than my need to be a giant. The shrinking happened slowly. It wasn't an avalanche. It was erosion. It started with the first big raise I got. I had landed a retainer with a tech startup that bumped my annual income over 6 figures for the first time. I came home vibrating with excitement. I wanted champagne. I wanted to dance in the kitchen. Adrian cooked dinner that night. He made pasta. He raised a glass and said, "Congratulations." But before I could even finish describing the contract, he pivoted. He spent the next 2 hours talking about his plan to launch his own boutique firm. He talked over me, around me, and through me. "That is great, babe," he said, waving his fork dismissively at my news. "Your salary is cute. It helps with the bills. But just wait until I really take off. That is when life begins." My salary was cute. The word lodged in my throat like a fishbone. But I swallowed it. I smiled. I asked him about his firm. The turning point, the moment the dynamic calcified into stone, happened a year later. I had accidentally outshined him. I accepted a crisis management project for a regional bank. It was messy, high-stakes work, and the honorarium for 3 weeks of consulting was equal to Adrian's entire annual bonus. I made the mistake of being proud. We were at a dinner party with his colleagues, and someone asked what I was working on. I answered honestly. I mentioned the scope. I mentioned the stakes. The table went quiet. For a brief second, I was the most interesting person in the room. Adrian went cold. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. In the cab ride home, the silence was heavy and suffocating. Finally, he broke it with a laugh that sounded like glass shattering. "You know," he said, staring out the window at the passing streetlights, "I really do not want to be known as Mr. Xenia. It is a little emasculating, isn't it? Having your wife earn more on a gig than you do all year?" He framed it as a joke, but the threat was clear: if you get too big, you will lose me. So when the offer from Halberd Ridge Advisors came, asking us to move to Chicago, I was already primed to fold. It was a massive opportunity for him, a prestigious firm, a signing bonus, a chance to play in the big leagues. He came home with the offer letter, slamming it on the kitchen counter. "We are moving to Chicago," he announced. He didn't ask. He didn't consult. "What about my clients?" I asked, staring at the letter. "You are freelance. Xenia," he said, not looking up from the paper. "You can work from anywhere. You just need Wi-Fi and a laptop. It is not like you have a career that is tied to a location, not like mine." He assumed my work was portable because he assumed it was small. He assumed I would follow because he assumed he was the leader. And the tragedy is not that he asked. The tragedy is that I agreed. I told myself that PR was flexible. I told myself that I could build a remote empire. But deep down, the decision was not about logistics. It was about penance. I felt guilty for making him feel small in the cab that night. I wanted to prove that I was a good wife. I wanted to prove that I prioritized him. So I packed up our life in Denver. I gave up my office space. I said goodbye to my local network. I moved us to Chicago and set up my desk in the guest bedroom, promising myself I would stay out of his way. I decided to become the background noise to his symphony. I look back at that young woman in the rain in Seattle, and I want to shake her. I want to scream at her, but I cannot hate her. She was in love, and she thought love meant making space. But as I lay in bed, years later, staring at the ceiling while Adrian slept beside me, I realized the terrible truth. It wasn't just that he was a narcissist. It wasn't just that he was insecure. It was that I had trained him. I had taught him that my needs were secondary. I had taught him that my money was our money, but his money was his success. I had taught him that he was the main character, and I was just the supporting actress who handled the logistics. He was only reading the script I had helped write, and now I was about to burn the entire theater down. The empire I built in the shadows began not in a boardroom, but in the back row of a sterile hotel conference center in Denver. It was a digital marketing summit, the kind of event where people use words like synergy and brand lift without a hint of irony. I was bored out of my mind, scrolling through my phone, when the woman next to me leaned over. "I am going to scream if that speaker says the word pivot one more time," she whispered. I turned to look at her. She had sharp eyes, messy hair tied back with a pencil, and she was typing on a laptop covered in stickers that said things like, "Encrypted and go away." This was Amara Reyes. She was a cybersecurity prodigy who had been fired from 3 major firms because she refused to wear a suit and refused to be polite to incompetent executives. We skipped the next session and went to the hotel bar at 2 in the afternoon. By the second round of drinks, we had mapped out the architecture of our future. Amara was sick of fixing firewalls for companies that did not listen. I was sick of writing press releases for disasters that could have been avoided. We realized we were 2 halves of the same weapon. She was the shield, and I was the smoke. "We should start a firm," Amara said, tapping her glass against the coaster. "Not a PR agency, not a security consultancy, a containment unit. We only take the jobs that the big firms are too scared to touch. The data breaches, the executive extortion cases, the things that kill stock prices overnight. I felt a spark in my chest, a rush of adrenaline that I had not felt in years. I realized that this was where my talent actually lived. I was not meant to plan launch parties. I was meant to be the person you call when the building is burning down and you need to walk out without getting soot on your suit. We filed the paperwork for the Victoria Reyes Containment Group the next day. We set it up as an LLC in Colorado. Amara was the chief technical officer. I was the chief executive officer. We agreed on a strict policy of anonymity. We would not have a website. We would not have social media. We would operate entirely on referrals from lawyers who needed their clients' problems to disappear. Our first major crisis hit 4 months later. A mid-sized fintech platform had just discovered a breach. Hackers had accessed the social security numbers of 2 million users and were threatening to dump the database on the dark web unless a ransom was paid in Bitcoin. The company's internal PR team was paralyzed. Their lawyers were preparing for bankruptcy. Amara and I flew in. We set up a war room in a conference center off-site. For 72 hours, we did not sleep. Amara went into the code, tracking the digital footprint of the hackers, engaging in a dangerous game of cat and mouse to verify the data they held. I handled the narrative. I drafted the notification letters to regulators, the scripts for the call centers, and the statements for the board. I constructed a timeline of disclosure that complied with the law, but minimized the panic. When Amara found a flaw in the hacker's encryption key that allowed us to lock them out of their own leverage, I was ready. We neutralized the threat. The data was never leaked. The company's stock dipped 3% and recovered within a week. They paid us a fee of $150,000 for 3 days of work. That was the beginning. The growth was not linear. It was vertical. In our first full year, we billed $900,000. By the second year, as word spread among the high-end law firms in Chicago and New York that there was a ghost team capable of fixing the unfixable, we hit $2,700,000. By year 3, we were projecting $5 million. And through all of it, I went home to Adrian and played the role of the struggling freelancer. It was a strange, dissociative existence. By day, I was commanding rooms full of terrified executives, telling CEOs twice my age to sit down and shut up if they wanted to save their companies. I was moving millions of dollars around, negotiating with blackmailers, and orchestrating media blackouts. By night, I was the wife who made less money. I would come home, wash the adrenaline off my face, and listen to Adrian complain about his boss at Halberd Ridge. "Honey, how was your day?" he would ask, barely looking up from his phone. "Did you finish that press release for the yoga studio?" "It was fine," I would say, chopping vegetables for a dinner I bought with a corporate card he did not know existed. Just small projects, enough to pay a few bills. He liked that answer. It made him feel secure. He would then launch into a monologue about a deal he was working on, a merger worth $500 million, where he was just a junior associate doing due diligence. But the way he told it, he was the architect of the entire transaction. We went to a holiday party for his firm at the Drake Hotel. I wore a dress I had bought at a department store sale because Adrian had made a comment about watching our budget. He introduced me to a senior partner, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. "This is my wife, Xenia," Adrian said, beaming with the pride of a man showing off a well-trained pet. "She does a little marketing stuff, freelance, keeps her busy while I'm at the office." The partner smiled politely and looked past me, dismissing me as instantly irrelevant. I smiled back, sipping my cheap white wine. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell the partner that just last week, I had saved his firm's biggest competitor from a sexual harassment scandal that would have decimated their board. I wanted to tell him that my hourly rate was higher than his, but I stayed silent. I let Adrian have his stage. Amara was the only one who saw the rot setting in. We were having a strategy meeting at a coffee shop in the Loop after I had just dodged a call from Adrian asking where his dry cleaning was. Amara slammed her laptop shut and looked at me. "You are playing a dangerous game." "Xenia," she said. Her voice was low, cutting through the noise of the espresso machine. "You are bifurcating your soul. You are becoming a giant in this room and a mouse in your own house. I am just keeping the peace. I defended myself. He needs to feel like the provider. It is just a temporary dynamic until he gets his promotion. No, Amara said, shaking her head. You are teaching him that you are invisible. You are playing the role of the background character so well that he is starting to believe it is your only setting. One day, he is going to look at you and he won't see the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company. He will just see the woman who picks up his shirts, and you will have no one to blame but yourself. Her words haunted me, but the business kept growing, pulling me deeper into the lie. The bigger VRCG got, the harder it became to explain it to Adrian without destroying the fragile ecosystem of our marriage. Then came the acquisition offers. First, it was a media conglomerate from New York. They offered $12 million. We declined. We were worth more. But then Northlight Holdings approached us. They were a global investment firm looking to add a crisis management arm to their portfolio. They did their due diligence quietly. They saw the numbers. They saw the client list. They saw the margins. They came back with a term sheet that made my breath catch in my throat. A valuation of $28 million, a cash buyout for the majority stake, with Amara and me staying on to run the division. It was the kind of money that changes bloodlines. It was the kind of money that buys freedom. But there was a catch. Northlight wanted to publicize the acquisition. They wanted to put our names on the press release. They wanted Zinnia Victoria and Amara Reyes to be the public faces of this new prestigious division. I hesitated. I held the term sheet in my hands, staring at the number that would make me independently wealthy for the rest of my life. And my first thought was not about the vacations I could take or the house I could buy. My first thought was about Adrian. If I sign this, I thought, he will know. If I sign this, the illusion is over. He will know that for 3 years, I have been the primary earner. He will know that his success is a fraction of mine. He will know that he is not the king of the castle. I sat in our office, the hum of the server room in the background, and I felt a wave of nausea. I was actually considering turning down $28 million to protect a man's ego. Amara watched me, her expression unreadable. You have to decide. Zenia, she said softly, do you want to be rich and free? Or do you want to be married to a fantasy? I looked at the pen. I looked at the contract. I thought about the way Adrian had looked at me that morning, folding his newspaper, telling me not to worry about the electric bill because he had it covered. I thought about the space he said he needed. I thought about the better he thought he could find. And that was when I realized Amara was right. I had built an empire in the dark because I was afraid of my own light. It was time to turn the switch on. 2 hours after Adrian walked out the door with his Rimowa suitcase and his bruised ego, I was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than his car. The office of Cassandra Hale was located on the 45th floor of a steel tower on Wacker Drive, overlooking the river that cut through the city like a dark artery. Cassandra was the kind of divorce attorney who did not advertise on billboards. She was a ghost whispered about in country clubs and boardrooms, the nuclear option for women who had too much to lose. She flipped through the stack of documents I had placed on her glass desk. Her nails were painted a deep, blood red, and they made a sharp clicking sound against the paper. She did not look up for 5 minutes. The silence was heavy, filled only with the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of pages turning. My hands were folded in my lap. They were shaking, just slightly. A microscopic tremor that betrayed the adrenaline flooding my system. I clasped them tighter until the knuckles turned white. You are the breadwinner, Cassandra said. It was not a question. She looked up, removing her reading glasses. Her eyes were gray and unimpressed. But you have spent 7 years legally and socially pretending you are a dependent. I wanted him to feel secure, I said. The words sounded foolish in this room, stripping away the romance to reveal the bad business decision underneath. You committed fraud against your own dignity. Xenia, Cassandra replied, picking up a pen. And now we have to untangle it before he realizes what he is actually entitled to. She pulled a legal pad toward her and began to sketch a diagram. It looked less like a separation agreement and more like a battle map. The apartment in River North, she said. tapping the pad. You bought it 3 months before the wedding. The title is in your name. We can protect that. It is a premarital asset. The fact that he lived there does not give him equity, especially since you have proof he did not contribute to the mortgage or the premium rent payments. She drew a circle around the word apartment and slashed a line through it. Safe. The company, she continued, her pen hovering over the acronym VRCG. This is the kill zone. You found it during the marriage. Technically, in Illinois. The appreciation of a business started during a marriage is marital property. He is going to come for it. He is going to come for half of that $28 million. He didn't do anything, I said, my voice rising. He didn't write a line of code. He didn't sign a single client. He doesn't even know the password to our server. It does not matter, Cassandra said coldly. He will argue contribution. I know his type. He is a finance guy who feels inadequate. He will hire a lawyer who will construct a narrative that he sacrificed his own high-flying career to take a stable, lower-paying job so you could take the risk of starting a business. He will paint himself as the silent investor, the supportive husband who kept the lights on while you played startup. He will try to claim that your success stands on the foundation of his stability. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a distortion of reality so grotesque that I knew, with absolute certainty, it was exactly what Adrian would do. It fit his psychological profile perfectly. He would rewrite history to make himself the hero of my story, even as he tried to rob me. So what do we do? I asked. We drowned him in paper, Cassandra said. We do not fight him with emotion. We fight him with data. I need you to build a forensic timeline of your marriage. Every dollar, every date. We need to prove that not only did he not support you, but he was actually a financial liability. We need to prove that his stability was a myth funded by your capital. I left her office with a mission. I went home not to cry, but to work. I turned the dining room table into a command center. I logged into the archival servers of my bank. I pulled statements going back 5 years. I found the months Adrian was unemployed between jobs. The 4 months where he claimed he was consulting but was actually playing golf. I found the transfer confirmations. June 14th, rent payment, $7,500, paid by Zenaya Victoria. August 3rd, credit card bill, $4,200, paid by Xenia Victoria. September 10th, networking course for Adrian Cole, $3,000, paid by VRCG. I printed them all. I scanned them. I organized them into binders labeled by year. I was building a dossier on my own husband, treating him like a hostile entity in a corporate takeover. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were processing a case for a client. The man who had held me when I was sick, the man who had vowed to love me, was dissolving into a series of debit transactions and failed promises. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Adrian. You are being dramatic. Pick up the phone. I looked at the message. I did not reply. In crisis management, silence is a tactical weapon. It forces the other side to fill the void with their own anxiety. If you do not speak, they start to negotiate with themselves. An hour later, another text. I am staying at Tyler's. This is embarrassing. Xenia, we need to talk like adults. I highlighted a line on a bank statement where I had paid off his student loan interest. I did not reply. 3 hours later, 7 years of marriage doesn't deserve a response. Are you really doing this? I turned the phone face down. I was not doing this to hurt him. I was doing this to survive him. At 2 p.m, I made the call that would set the stage for the final act. I dialed the number for Aria Noir, the restaurant where Adrian had always dreamed of being a regular. Good afternoon. This is the events manager, a polished voice answered. This is Zenaya Victoria, I said. I have a reservation for 2 on Saturday night for Adrian Cole's birthday. I need to make changes. Certainly. Mrs. Cole, what do you need? Change the party size from 2 to 10, I said. And I need the Onyx room, the private dining space in the back. There was a pause on the line. The Onyx room had a minimum spend of $5,000. Of course, the manager said, his voice brightening. For 10 guests? And the menu? The chef's tasting menu, I said. With the full wine pairing, and I have a specific request for the room setup. I need a projector and a screen. I have a presentation. A presentation. The manager sounded confused. For a birthday dinner. Yes, I said. It is a retrospective of his year. It is a surprise. I need HDMI connectivity and high-speed Wi-Fi, and I need absolute discretion. If Mr. Cole calls to confirm, tell him everything is taken care of, but do not mention the equipment. Understood, he said. I hung up and opened my messaging app. I composed a message to the list Tyler, Mason, Lauren, Brielle. Hey everyone, I know it is last minute, but Adrian is having a milestone celebration this Saturday at Aria Noir. Private room. Very exclusive. He has been working on something big and wants his inner circle there. 8 p.m. Don't be late. He would love the support. I hit send. It was vague enough to be intriguing. They would assume Adrian was announcing a promotion, or a new fund, or perhaps our reconciliation. They would come for the free champagne, but they would stay for the spectacle. The final piece of the puzzle was the company. I met Amara and the representatives from Northlight Holdings in a conference room at the Peninsula Hotel the next morning. The air smelled of expensive coffee and wool suits. The acquisition contract sat in the center of the mahogany table. 62%, the Northlight lead negotiator said. We acquired 62% of VRCG for $28 million. You stay on as CEO. Amara remains CTO. The valuation is locked. I looked at the document. It was the end of my anonymity. It was the death of the small life I had lived to keep Adrian comfortable. I have one condition regarding the announcement, I said. The negotiator raised an eyebrow. Go on. The press release, I said. It is scheduled to go out on the wire services next Monday. I want to move it. To when? Sunday morning, I said. 8 o'clock sharp, the morning after this coming Saturday. That is a Sunday, the negotiator noted. News cycles are slow on Sundays. Exactly, I said. I wanted to hit the inbox of every financial reporter in Chicago just as they are having their morning coffee. I want it to be the only story they read. Amara looked at me from across the table. She knew exactly what Saturday night was. She knew exactly why I wanted the news to break on Sunday morning. It was the double tap. First, the private humiliation in the dining room. Then, the public confirmation to the world. We can do Sunday, the negotiator said, shrugging. If you sign today, I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake this time. I signed my name, Xenia Victoria, in black ink. The letters looked sharp, aggressive. Done, I said, pushing the contract across the table. I walked out of the hotel and into the cold Chicago wind. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. It was Brielle. Got the invite. So exciting. Is Adrian finally announcing the new fund? We will be there. I stared at the screen and smiled. It was a cold, mirthless expression. Something like that. I typed back. Everything was in place. The stage was set. The audience was invited. And the star of the show had no idea that his script had been rewritten. All I had to do now was wait for the curtain to rise. I arrived at Aria Noir 45 minutes early. I sat at the far end of the Onyx bar, positioned in the shadows where the amber recessed lighting did not quite reach. I was not wearing the beige knits or the sensible floral prints Adrian preferred me in. I was wearing a black silk satin slip dress that skimmed my body like a second skin. Cut on the bias, with a sharp, plunging back. My hair was slicked back into a tight, severe bun. I looked less like a wife waiting for her husband and more like a widow waiting for the reading of a will. I ordered sparkling water with a twist of lemon. I needed to be surgically sharp. The general manager, a man named Henri, who moved with the silent efficiency of a predator, approached me. He leaned over the bar, keeping his voice low. The room is ready, Mrs. Cole, he said. The projector is tested. The HDMI connection is stable, the screen is lowered, and the Wi-Fi network is isolated as you requested. Thank you, Henri, I said. sliding $100 bill across the cool stone surface. "Remember, no cake, no balloons, and when I give the signal, you close the doors." He nodded and vanished. I turned my stool slightly toward the entrance. I became the camera. I became the silent observer of the demolition I had orchestrated. The first to arrive were Tyler and Mason. It was 10 minutes past 8. They walked in with the swagger of men who believed the world was paved specifically for their Italian loafers. Tyler was wearing a navy suit that cost $3,000, but still looked tight across the shoulders, a testament to too many steak dinners and not enough cardio. Mason was in gray, checking his phone with a frown. I could hear them from where I sat. The acoustics of the entryway carried their voices over the low hum of jazz. "I do not get it," Mason muttered, scanning the room but looking right past me. "Adrian texts us at the last minute. Says it is a milestone. I thought he was crashing on your couch." "He is," Tyler replied, laughing a short, sharp sound. "He has been bitching about Zania for 3 days. Maybe he is finally announcing the divorce, or maybe he got that promotion at Halberd Ridge and he is ditching the wife and the job in one swoop." "Who organized this, though?" Mason asked, handing his coat to the hostess. "The invite came from Zania's number, but the tone was weird." Tyler shrugged. "She probably just hired the caterer. You know Zania. She is good at picking out napkins and staying out of the way. I bet Adrian put her up to it as a parting gift, a last supper." They followed the hostess toward the private corridor. They did not see the woman in black watching them. They did not know that the napkin picker had just bought their silence for the evening. Next came Lauren. She arrived alone, moving with the aerodynamic purpose of a corporate shark. Lauren was a senior associate at a rival firm. She had tolerated me at dinners for years, offering thin smiles and asking polite, dead-end questions about my little PR projects before turning back to the men to talk about yield curves. She checked her reflection in the foyer mirror, smoothing a stray hair. I could practically hear her internal monologue. She was annoyed to be here. She considered herself a serious person, and dinner with Adrian's domestic wife was a tax on her time. She likely thought I was sweet, harmless, and tragically uninteresting. She walked past the bar, her heels clicking a rhythm of dismissal. She was about to learn that boring women are the most dangerous kind because nobody watches their hands. Then, at 20 minutes past 8, Brielle made her entrance. She did not walk. She paraded. She was wearing a red dress that was a declaration of war, tight enough to show every curve and bright enough to burn the retina. She had a white fur stole draped over one arm. She looked around the restaurant, expecting an audience, and she got one. Diners paused to look. She thrived on it. She met the hostess with a dazzling, predatory smile. "I am here for Adrian Cole's party," she announced, loud enough for the table 10 feet away to hear. "I am one of the guests of honor." She stopped to order a glass of champagne at the service station before heading back. I looked at her profile. This was the woman who had whispered in my husband's ear that he was a lion living with a sheep. She believed she was the catalyst for his awakening. She believed she was saving him from a life of mediocrity. "He deserves better," I had heard her say to him once at a gallery opening, thinking I was out of earshot. "He needs a power couple dynamic." She took a sip of her drink and strutted toward the back room. She had no idea she was walking into a slaughterhouse. I checked my watch. It was 8:30. The cast was assembled. They were all in the Onyx room now. I could imagine the conversation. They would be sitting around the table, confused by the lack of festive decor. They would be whispering about my absence. Is she in the kitchen? Is she crying in the bathroom? Is Adrian going to propose to Brielle tonight? Then, the heavy oak door at the front opened, and Adrian walked in. He looked exhausted. His suit was wrinkled at the elbows, a rare oversight for him. His hair was slightly messy. He had the frantic energy of a man who had been trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces for 48 hours. He scanned the room, his eyes darting nervously. He was holding a small gift bag, probably a peace offering he had bought at the last-minute perfume or jewelry. Something generic to buy another month of my patience. He spotted the hostess, but before he could speak, I stood up. The movement caught his eye. He froze. He stared at me across the dimly lit lounge. For a second, he did not recognize me. He was looking for the soft, apologetic woman in the cardigan. He found a statue in black satin. He walked toward me, his steps hesitant. He looked at the dress. He looked at the way I held my chin. "Xenia," he whispered. "What is going on? I got a text from Tyler saying we are having a party. I thought you were mad." He licked his lips, his brain scrambling to make sense of the data. "Is this an apology? Are you trying to win me back?" He smiled then, a weak, hopeful expression. His ego had found a foothold. Of course. That had to be it. I had realized he was right. I was trying to impress him. I had booked the fancy restaurant to show him I could be the wife he wanted. "We should talk first," he said, reaching for my arm. "Just you and me, before we go in there. I have been thinking, and if you are willing to make some changes—" I stepped back. His hand grasped at empty air. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel. "We are not talking privately. Adrian, not anymore." "But the guys are in there," he hissed, glancing toward the corridor. "Brielle is in there. I cannot talk about our marriage in front of them." "This isn't a discussion about our marriage," I said, my face completely blank. "This is a presentation of facts, and since you value their opinion so much, since you value Tyler's advice and Brielle's vision of your future more than you value our vows, I decided they should be part of the conversation." "Xenia, stop it," he said, his voice taking on that familiar, condescending edge. "You are making a scene. You are acting hysterical." "Am I?" I asked. I gestured toward the hallway. "After you." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. He wanted to argue, but he didn't want to cause a scene in the lobby of Aria Noir. He fixed his tie, shot me a look of warning, and turned around. He marched toward the private room, convinced he could control whatever tantrum I was throwing. I followed 3 steps behind him. I felt like an executioner walking the condemned to the chair. We reached the double doors of the onyx room. The hostess stepped aside. Adrian placed his hand on the brass handle, took a deep breath to compose his successful man mask, and pushed the doors open. The room fell silent. 10 faces turned to look at us. Tyler was mid-laugh. Brielle was swirling her glass. They froze. The room was not set up for a party. There were no centerpieces. There were no candles. The lights were dimmed to a severe clinical level. At the head of the table, where the birthday boy usually sat, there was no chair. Instead, there was a large, portable screen pulled down from the ceiling. A high-definition projector hummed softly on a side table, casting a stark, white rectangle of light that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It looked like a boardroom. It looked like a court-martial. Adrian stopped in the doorway, blocking my path. He looked at the screen. He looked at his friends, who were staring back at him with confusion and a growing sense of unease. "Surprise," I said. Stepping around him, I walked past him, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. I did not look at him. I walked straight to the head of the table. Standing in front of the glowing white screen, I placed my clutch on the table. I took a remote control out of my hand. "Please, sit down, Adrian," I said, gesturing to the empty seat at the far end of the table, the seat furthest from me. The seat is usually reserved for the person being interviewed. "Xenia, what is this?" Brielle asked, her voice shrill in the silence. "Where's the cake?" I looked at her. I looked at all of them. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until it became physical. "There is no cake," I said. "Tonight is not about celebrating another year of Adrian's potential. Tonight is about reviewing the performance metrics of the last 7 years. I pressed the button on the remote. The white screen flickered. A logo appeared. Sharp, metallic letters against a dark background. Victoria Reyes Containment Group. Crisis Management Reputation Defense. 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. My husband told me he could do better. He told me I was not impressed. Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what I have been doing while he was busy waiting for his life to start. I heard Adrian's breath hitch. I saw Tyler put his drink down. The air in the room shifted from confusion to terror. The show had begun. I picked up a crystal flute of champagne from the table. I did not drink it. I held it by the stem, watching the bubbles rise in a perfect, frantic chain, and then I looked out at the 10 faces staring back at me. The room was dead silent, save for the low hum of the projector fan. 2 weeks ago, I said, my voice steady and devoid of any tremor. Adrian zipped up his suitcase and told me that he could do better. He told me, specifically, that his friends, that is you people, felt I was not impressive enough. He said I lacked ambition. He said I was holding him back from the life of high performance he deserved. I paused, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. Adrian shifted in his seat, his face pale, eyes darting toward the closed door. He looked like a man who had just realized he was sitting in an electric chair. Tonight, I continued, I want to ensure that everyone at this table has the correct data set to make that assessment. In my line of work, we do not make decisions based on feelings. We make them based on evidence. I pressed the button on the remote. Slide 1. The logo of the Victoria Reyes Containment Group filled the screen. It was stark, metallic, and imposing. Underneath it, the tagline read, Strategic Crisis Mitigation for Global Enterprise. For the last 3 years, I said, stepping to the side of the screen so the light hit my face. While Adrian told you I was at home writing press releases for local bakeries, I have been the co-founder and CEO of this firm. We do not do marketing. We do not do PR. We handle catastrophic risk. When a Fortune 500 company loses a database of social security numbers, or a CEO gets blackmailed with photos from a trip to Macau, they call me. I clicked to the next slide, slide 2. A bar graph appeared, rising sharply from left to right. It was aggressive. It was undeniable. This is our revenue growth, I narrated, pointing the laser pointer at the peaks. Year 1, $900,000. Year 2, $2,700,000. Year 3, which we just closed, $4,900,000. I looked at Tyler and Mason. They were bankers. They breathed in EBITDA. I saw Tyler's jaw go slack. He was doing the mental math instantly. A service business with low overhead and $5 million in revenue meant margins that Adrian could only dream of. And these, I said, gesturing to a list of blinded case studies on the right side of the screen, are the disasters I prevented: a data breach that would have tanked a fintech IPO, a sexual harassment scandal at a logistics firm that would have dissolved the board. I saved these companies hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization. That is what I do during the day while Adrian is at the gym. Mason whispered something to Tyler. I caught the word impressive. I clicked the remote again. Slide 3. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. On the screen was a screenshot of an email from Northlight Holdings. The subject line was Acquisition Confirmation. Next to it, I had pasted a PDF of a wire transfer confirmation. I zoomed in on the figure. $16,400,000. Yesterday, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational volume that made the number sound even louder. We sold 62% of the company to Northlight Holdings. The total valuation was $28 million. My personal payout, which hit my account yesterday morning, was $16,400,000. The sound of glass hitting china rang out. Brielle had dropped her fork. She was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide and glassy. She was looking at a number that was likely larger than the net worth of everyone at the table combined. She looked at me, and for the first time, she did not see a mouse. She saw a predator. Adrian was making a sound in his throat, a strangled, dry cough. He was staring at the number like it was a physical blow. He was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over again. But money is not the only measure of a partnership, I said, cutting through his shock. Support is also about stability. Adrian often tells you that he carries us, that he is the provider, that I am the dependent. I clicked the remote. The slide changed from the sleek black corporate design to a harsh, white spreadsheet. It was titled Household Subsidies 2021-2024. "Let us review the ledger," I said. "Xenia, stop," Adrian pleaded. His voice was thin, cracking. "Please, do not do this." I ignored him. I looked at Lauren. "You are a detail-oriented person." "Lauren," I said. "Look at the rows." I read them out loud. Rent, months April, May, and June of last year. This was when Adrian was between jobs and finding himself. $7,500 a month. Paid by Xenia Victoria. Total contribution from Adrian 0. I moved the laser pointer down. Credit card payments. The Amex Platinum he uses to buy rounds of drinks for you guys. 80% of the balance is paid from my private account. That suit he is wearing, I paid for it. That watch on his wrist, I paid for it. Adrian shrank in his chair. He looked physically smaller. The image of the successful provider, the high-finance husband, was being stripped away layer by layer, revealing a man who was essentially an allowance recipient. And finally, I said, the symbols of his success. Slide 5. A photo of the Range Rover Adrian drove appeared on the screen. Next to it was a copy of the lease agreement. "He calls this his truck," I said. "He tells you it is the symbol of his hard work. But if you look at the registrant, you will see it is leased to Victoria Reyes Containment Group. It is a company fleet vehicle. I pay $1,900 a month. Adrian is listed as a secondary driver. He does not own the wheels he drove here on." I clicked one last time. An invoice appeared. It was for a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. "The vacation he took you all on last summer." I looked at Tyler. "He told you he got a huge bonus and wanted to treat the boys. The truth is, VRCG had a banner month, and I needed a tax write-off. I paid for your tequila. I paid for your sweets. My company sponsored your bachelor party. Tyler, Adrian did not spend a dime." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Tyler looked at Adrian with a mixture of pity and disgust. To be broke is one thing. To lie about it to other men is a capital offense in their world. Adrian had his head in his hands. He was not looking at anyone. He was destroyed. I turned off the projector. The screen went black, plunging the room back into the dim, ambient light. The contrast was blinding. "So," I said, placing the remote gently on the table, "we have established that I have a career, I have the money, and I have paid for the lifestyle that allowed Adrian to pretend he was a king." I walked over to where Adrian sat. Slumped and broken, I stood behind his chair, looking down at the part in his hair. "I met with my lawyer, Cassandra Hale, yesterday," I announced to the room. "I have filed for legal separation, as of this morning. The joint accounts have been frozen. The locks on the apartment in River North have been changed. The access codes have been reset." I leaned down, whispering close to his ear, but loud enough for the table to hear. "You do not live there anymore, Adrian. That is my apartment. Those are my things. You are currently homeless." I straightened up and looked at the group one last time. I saw fear in Brielle's eyes. I saw respect in Mason's. I saw the total collapse of the social structure they had built their evenings around. "If you still think I am not impressive enough," I said, "then by all means, Adrian, go find someone better. Go find someone who will fund your delusions with more enthusiasm than I did." I picked up my glass of champagne again. I raised it in a mock toast. "Happy birthday, Adrian," I said. "This is the most expensive severance package you will ever receive. Enjoy the tasting menu. I have already paid the bill." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked toward the double doors. "Xenia!" Adrian shouted. It was a desperate, guttural sound. "Xenia! Wait!" I heard the scrape of his chair as he scrambled up, but I was already at the door. I pushed it open and stepped out into the corridor. The air in the hallway felt cooler, cleaner. I could hear the explosion of voices erupt behind me, the accusations, the questions. the sound of a false reality shattering against the hard truth. "How could you lie to us?" I heard Tyler yell. 16 million. I heard Brielle gasp. I kept walking. I walked past the bar where I had waited. I walked past the hostess who looked at me with wide eyes. I walked out the front door of Aria Noir and onto the sidewalk of Chicago. The night air hit my face. I took a deep breath. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt light. It was the specific weightlessness of a woman who had just dropped 200 pounds of dead weight. I hailed a cab, slid into the back seat, and watched the city lights blur past me, leaving the wreckage in my rearview mirror where it belonged. We are back at 4:03 in the morning. The phone was still vibrating in my hand, a persistent, angry insect demanding attention. The screen displayed the name Brielle Knox. I sat up in bed, leaning against the velvet headboard, and finally slid my thumb across the glass to accept the call. I did not say hello. I simply brought the phone to my ear and waited. "Please pick up," Brielle's voice came through the speaker. It was unrecognizable. The confident, sharp soprano that usually dominated cocktail parties had been replaced by a wet, jagged sobbing. She sounded like a child who had lost her mother in a supermarket. "Please, the things that happened tonight, it is about you." I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. My hand was steady. I took a sip, feeling the cool liquid coat my throat. I felt a strange shift in my chest. I was no longer the scorned wife. I was no longer the woman who had walked out of the restaurant. I slid seamlessly into my professional persona. This was a crisis call. Brielle was the client, albeit an unwilling one, and she was debriefing me on the collapse of a brand I used to manage, the brand of Adrian Cole. "I am listening. Brielle," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of sleep, devoid of sympathy. "It exploded," she choked out. "Everything exploded. You left. And it just turned into a nightmare." I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the kitchen in the dark. I did not turn on the lights. The city glow from the window was enough. I leaned against the marble island, clutching the phone, and let her talk. According to Brielle, the silence I left behind in the Onyx room lasted exactly 5 seconds. Then, chaos ensued. "Adrian stood up so fast he knocked his chair over," Brielle recounted, her breath hitching. "He was red. He was shaking. He started shouting at the screen. He told us it was fake. He said you made the slides on your laptop to humiliate him. He said there was no way you had a company worth $28 million. He kept saying the numbers were just for show, that it was a manipulation tactic." I smiled into the darkness. Denial. The first stage of grief. It was predictable. Adrian could not reconcile the mouse with the lion, so he decided the lion must be a hologram. "He tried to grab the remote to turn it back on," Brielle continued. "But Henri, the manager, came in. He told us we had to leave. He said the disturbance was upsetting the other guests. Xenia, they kicked us out. They kicked Adrian out of his own birthday party." I could visualize it perfectly. The humiliating march through the main dining room. Adrian, flushed and frantic, the high-value friends, Tyler and Mason and Lauren, keep their heads down, trying to dissociate themselves from the disaster. The sidewalk outside Aria Noir became the courtroom for the final verdict. "We were on the curb," Brielle said, "and Adrian looked at Tyler. He wanted backup. He wanted Tyler to say that you were crazy, but Tyler just looked at him. Tyler Briggs, the man who had let Adrian sleep on his couch, the man who had encouraged him to find space. Tyler turned on him," I asked. Tyler laughed. Brielle whispered, "It was mean." "Xenia?" He laughed right in Adrian's face. He asked him, "You lived with her for 7 years, and you never asked to see a bank statement. You let her pay your rent, and you thought she was broke." Tyler told him he was the blindest man in Chicago. He said he couldn't respect a guy who didn't know who was actually paying for his suit. "And Mason?" I asked. Mason was the portfolio manager. He cared only for the bottom line. "Mason was on his phone," Brielle said. "He was looking up your company. He found the acquisition rumors on a Bloomberg terminal app. He looked at Adrian and said, 'The valuation is real. Northlight doesn't buy vaporware. Then he looked at the building across the street, the one where Halberd Ridge has offices, and he said, "If she wanted to, Adrian, she could probably buy a controlling stake in the floor you work on. You are not just divorced, man, you are statistically insignificant compared to her." Statistically insignificant? It was a cold, brutal assessment. It was the kind of language Adrian used to describe others. Hearing it applied to him must have felt like a physical beating. "And Lauren," I pressed. I wanted the full dossier. "Lauren was the worst," Brielle said, her voice trembling. She didn't even yell. She just sighed. She told Adrian that she always felt uncomfortable when he talked about you. She said she always suspected you were smarter than him because you never felt the need to prove it. She told him that the only reason he looked successful was because he was standing on your shoulders. She called an Uber and left him there on the sidewalk. I took another sip of water. The image of Adrian standing alone on the concrete, stripped of his friends, stripped of his narrative, stripped of his dignity, should have made me feel sad. We had been married for 7 years. I had loved him once, but all I felt was the clinical satisfaction of a structural engineer watching a condemned building come down exactly as planned. "And you, Brielle?" I asked softly. "What did you do?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the background noise of her apartment, the hum of a refrigerator, the ragged intake of her breath. "I stayed," she admitted. "For a minute. He was crying. Zania, he was asking why you did this. He was asking why you hated him so much." "I do not hate him," I said. "I just stopped funding him." "I have to tell you something," Brielle said. Her voice dropped to a whisper, thick with shame. "The reason I told him he could do better, the reason I pushed him to leave you—" "Go on." "It wasn't because I thought he was too good for you," she confessed. "It was because I wanted him. I have wanted him since college. I thought if I could make him see you as ordinary, he would finally look at me and see a match. I was jealous. Zinnia, I wanted to be the power couple. I wanted to be the one on his arm." She let out a bitter, wet laugh. "And tonight, when I saw that slide with the $16 million figure, I realized I wasn't competing with you. I wasn't even in the same league as you. I played by myself. I destroyed his marriage to get a man who turned out to be a fraud. And I did it by insulting a woman who is worth more than I will ever be." "That is a fair assessment," I said. "Was this revenge?" she asked suddenly. The question was desperate. She needed to label my actions. She needed to believe I was a scorned woman acting out of passion, because passion implies I still cared. "Did you do all of this tonight just to hurt him, just to hurt us? Because if you did, it worked. God, Zinnia, you destroyed him." I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The lights were blinking in the distance. Somewhere out there, Adrian was sleeping on a couch that wasn't his, or perhaps walking the streets, trying to find a narrative that made sense. "Brielle," I said, my voice cool and detached. "If I wanted revenge, I would have leaked the story to the press before the dinner. I would have sent the foreclosure notices on his reputation to his boss. I would have burned him down publicly." "Then what was this?" "It was a correction," I said. "I simply put the truth into the room. For 7 years. You all ignored me. You looked right through me. Tonight, I just made sure you couldn't look away. I didn't do it to see him suffer. I did it so I could finally be seen." "He wants to talk to you," she said, her voice pleading now. "He is a mess. Can you just give him a chance to explain? Can you answer his calls?" "No," I said. "But 7 years." "The marriage ended 2 weeks ago," I said firmly. "It ended the moment he zipped that suitcase and told me I wasn't enough. What happened tonight was just the paperwork. The emotional contract was voided the morning he walked out." "And me?" she asked in a small voice. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it. I thought about her red dress. I thought about her smug whispers at parties. I thought about the way she had looked at me like I was furniture. And I realized, with total clarity, that hate requires an investment of energy I was no longer willing to spend. "You are not special enough to hate, Brielle," I said. "I do not hate you. I just do not think about you at all." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her starting to say something else, a stammering apology or perhaps another defense, but I did not listen. I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I walked back to the bedroom. The room was quiet. The sheets were cool. I placed the phone on the nightstand and held down the power button. The screen went black. I climbed back into bed and pulled the duvet up to my chin. For the first time in weeks, my mind was not racing with strategies or contingencies. The crisis was managed. The containment was complete. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The kind of sleep that only comes when you have absolutely nothing left to hide. The internet does not care about truth. It cares about friction. And on Sunday morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I gave the world enough friction to start a forest fire. The official press release from Northlight Holdings hit the wire services with the precision of a drone strike. Northlight Holdings acquires crisis management firm Victoria Reyes Containment Group for $28 million. It was dry, corporate, and factual. But the blogosphere does not run on dry facts. By 9 o'clock, the gossip sites had connected the dots. Someone I suspected, Tyler, who leaked things to feel important, or perhaps a waiter at Aria Noir looking for a payday, had sold the story of the birthday dinner. The headlines were instantaneous and lurid. The $28 million secret. How one CEO hid her empire from her husband. The birthday massacre. Wife reveals fortune via PowerPoint. Dumps husband at table. Is this the most brutal breakup in Chicago history? I sat in my living room, which was now legally and physically a fortress against Adrian, and watched the notifications scroll down my iPad screen like a waterfall. The public opinion was split down the middle, cleaved by a jagged line of gender and ego. On Twitter, a hashtag with my name was trending. One camp hailed me as a feminist icon, the symbol of the silent labor of women finally demanding credit. They retweeted the slide about the rent payments with captions like, "Queen behavior and receipts do not lie." The other camp was vicious. Men's rights forums and conservative pundits painted me as a monster. They called me cold, manipulative, and cruel. They argued that humiliating a man in front of his friends was a form of psychological abuse. They asked, if the roles were reversed, would we cheer for a man who hid millions from his struggling wife? I did not engage. I did not tweet. I treated my own life exactly as I would treat a client's hostile takeover. I set up a war room in the kitchen with Amara and a crisis PR specialist we had flown in from New York. We mapped out the narrative architecture. We do not talk about marriage, I instructed them, circling the topic on the whiteboard with a red marker. If a reporter asks about the dinner, we pivot to the acquisition. We pivot to the technology VRCG built. We frame the secrecy not as deception, but as operational security required by the sensitive nature of our clients. And the husband, the PR specialist asked. He is collateral damage, I said. We wish him well. We respect his privacy. We do not throw mud. We let him scream while we speak in press releases. But Adrian was not screaming alone. By Tuesday, he had hired help. Victor Lane was a lawyer who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced tailored suits and bad faith arguments. He was famous for representing athletes and politicians who had been caught in compromising positions, spinning their sins into stories of victimization. He launched a counter-campaign that was impressive in its audacity. He leaked a narrative to the tabloids that Adrian was the deceived spouse. The story went like this. Adrian had deliberately taken a step back in his career, accepting a lower-paying, stable job at Halberd Ridge to provide a safety net so I could pursue my dream. He claimed he did not know the company was making millions because I had actively committed financial infidelity. He painted himself as the supportive partner who had been blindsided by a wife who hoarded wealth while watching him struggle to pay for dinner. It was a lie. It was a grotesque inversion of the last 7 years, but it stuck. People love a victim, especially a handsome one in a wrinkled suit. On Wednesday morning, I met with Cassandra Hale in her office. She tossed a copy of the Chicago Sun-Times onto the desk. The headline read, "Sacrificed for her success, Adrian Cole, claims he was the foundation of the VRCG empire. He is going for the jugular, Cassandra said, her voice tight. Victor is going to argue that his emotional support and career sacrifice constitute a contribution to the enterprise. He is asking for 50% of your payout. He wants $14 million. Xenia. I looked at the photo of Adrian in the paper. He looked sad. He looked broken. He looked nothing like the man who had told me I wasn't impressive enough 2 weeks ago. Do you want to kill him? Cassandra asked. I have the files. We can release the emails where he belittled your career. We can release the testimony from his friends about how he mocked you. We can get down in the mud and show the world exactly who he is. I looked at the city skyline through the window. I thought about the thousands of comments online, the strangers debating my morality, the noise of the last 72 hours. If I fought him in the press, this would drag on for months. I would become that woman forever. My company, my achievement, would always be a footnote to my divorce. No, I said. Cassandra looked surprised. No. I do not want to win the argument, I said. I want to exit the conversation. If we fight him in public, we validate his claim that he matters. I want to render him irrelevant. So what is the strategy? We offer a settlement, I said. Cassandra frowned. We do not settle with extortionists. Xenia, we crush them. We are not settling because I am afraid, I corrected her. We are paying a disposal fee. I pulled a notepad toward me and wrote down a number. It was significant, but it was nowhere near $14 million. It was enough to buy a condo in Lincoln Park. It was enough to start over. It was enough to make him go away, but not enough to make him powerful. Offer him this, I said, tapping the paper. $1,500,000, tax-free cash payment. That is too generous, Cassandra argued. He deserves zero. We can prove he contributed nothing. I know, I said, but proving it takes time, and lawyers cost money, and every day this is in the news. My brand suffers. I am paying for speed, but there are conditions. I flipped the page and wrote 2 words, NDA and disclaimer. He signs a non-disclosure agreement that is ironclad, I listed. He never speaks my name in public again. He never mentions VRCG. He deletes the photos. And most importantly, he signed a legal affidavit admitting that he made zero financial, intellectual, or operational contribution to the founding or scaling of Victoria Reyes Containment Group. He admits, in writing, that the narrative he fed the press was false. Cassandra sat back in her chair, studying me. The hard lines of her face softened into a look of grudging respect. She realized what I was doing. I wasn't buying peace. I was buying the truth. I was forcing him to sell his victimhood for a check. You are willing to pay $1.5 million just to make him admit he was useless, she asked. I am willing to pay $1.5 million to never have to hear his voice again, I said. I am buying my silence. Cassandra, I am buying the rest of my life back. It is a business expense. She nodded slowly. It is cold. Xenia, it is incredibly cold. It is efficient, I replied. We sent the offer over to Victor Lane that afternoon. The response was immediate. They blustered. They threatened. They said Adrian was insulted by the low number. But I knew Adrian. I knew his bank account. I knew he was currently sleeping on a friend's couch with less than $5,000 to his name and a mountain of credit card debt that I was no longer paying. He was bleeding out. Victor Lane was a shark. But sharks like to get paid. He knew that if they went to court, I would win eventually, and he might get nothing. A guaranteed $1 million payday minus his 30% fee was tempting. By Friday, they caved. The court set a date for the final mediation on the following Monday. It was to be a closed-door session to sign the papers and finalize the divorce decree. The media got wind of it, of course. They were camping out on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse, hungry for one last photo of the warring couple. I spent the weekend in the office. I did not look at the gossip blogs. I did not read the think pieces about the wife who won. I focused on the integration with Northlight. I focused on the future. On Sunday night, the night before the final signing, I sat alone in my apartment. The silence was different now. It wasn't the heavy, lonely silence of a marriage that was dying. It was the expansive, echoey silence of a space that was waiting to be filled with something new. I checked my phone one last time. The hashtag Xenia Victoria was still trending, but it had slipped down the list. Replaced by a scandal involving a senator and an intern, the world was moving on. The audience was getting bored. I turned off the phone. Tomorrow. I would walk into a room and buy my freedom. Tomorrow. Adrian would have to look at a check and decide what his pride was actually worth. I already knew the answer. He would take the money. He would always take the money. And in doing so, he would confirm exactly why I had left him behind. The conference room at the Cook County Courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a neutral ground for a war that had been fought entirely on unequal terrain. I walked in at 9 o'clock sharp, flanked by Cassandra Hale. I was wearing a white suit, crisp and sharp, a visual rejection of the mourning widow role. On the other side of the mahogany table sat Adrian. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in 2 weeks. His suit, usually immaculate, was wrinkled at the shoulders, hanging loosely on a frame that had thinned from stress. His eyes were rimmed with dark circles, the telltale sign of a man who had spent his nights reading internet comments about his own incompetence. Next to him sat Victor Lane, his lawyer. Victor was the opposite. He was tanned, polished, and radiating the artificial confidence of a man who charged $600 an hour to rewrite reality. Victor did not waste time. He opened his leather portfolio and spread a series of photographs on the table. They were pictures of us from the early years in Denver, me looking at Adrian adoringly, me sitting in the audience at one of his speeches. "My client," Victor began, his voice smooth and theatrical, "has been the victim of a sophisticated financial deception. But more than that, he has been the emotional bedrock of this union. These photos show a supportive husband, a man who stepped back, who took a less demanding role at Halberd Ridge, specifically to allow his wife the mental space to dabble in her entrepreneurial ventures. He sacrificed his trajectory for hers. That sacrifice has a value, and that value is 50% of the marital estate." He paused for effect. It was a good speech. If you did not know the math, you might have believed it. Cassandra did not look at the photos. She did not look at Victor. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out 3 heavy black binders. She dropped them on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "That is a lovely story, Victor," Cassandra said, her voice devoid of temperature. "But in this room, we deal in receipts." She opened the first binder. "Exhibit A," she said. "Rent payments for the River North apartment. For the last 18 months, while your client claims he was supporting my client, Xenia paid 100% of the housing costs. Here are the wire transfers." She flipped a page. "Exhibit B, vehicle lease. The Range Rover your client drove to this courthouse is paid for by Victoria Reyes Containment Group. He has not made a single payment, ever." She flipped another page, faster now. "Exhibit C, professional development. Here are the invoices for Adrian's networking classes, his CFA study materials, and his golf club membership, all paid for by Xenia. He did not sacrifice his career for her. She subsidized his career so he could pretend to have one." Victor tried to interrupt, but Cassandra held up a hand. "And finally," she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table, "the operating agreement for VRCG. It shows the initial capitalization of the company. Every single dollar came from Xenia's savings account, predating the marriage. Adrian Cole is not listed as a founder. He is not listed as an advisor. He is not listed at all." Adrian stared at the binders. He looked like he wanted to vomit, but the worst was yet to come. Cassandra pulled out a manila envelope. "We also have 2 additional pieces of evidence regarding the nature of this so-called supportive partnership." She pulled out a sworn affidavit. "This is from Lauren Miller," Cassandra said, "a colleague of yours, Adrian. She states under oath that on multiple occasions, including company dinners in 2022 and 2023, you referred to your wife's work as, quote, cute little projects, unquote. She testifies that you openly mocked Zinnia's ambition to your peers to make yourself appear superior. Adrian flinched. And this, Cassandra said, holding up a printout of an email, is from Brielle Knox. It was sent to the court voluntarily yesterday. Adrian looked up, betrayal flashing in his eyes. In this email, Cassandra read, Ms. Knox admits that she actively encouraged you to leave Zinnia because she believed you were, quote, easy to manipulate, unquote. She states that your decision to ask for a divorce was not based on Zinnia's lack of success, but on your own insecurity, which she exploited. The room fell silent. The narrative of the devoted, sacrificed husband had not just been dismantled, it had been incinerated. The court-appointed mediator, a gray-haired man who had been silent until now, adjusted his glasses. He looked at Adrian. Mr. Cole, the mediator asked softly, in 7 years of marriage, did you ever once ask your wife to see a balance sheet? Did you ever ask her, specifically, what her company did? Adrian opened his mouth. He looked at Victor. He looked at the table. He closed his mouth. The silence stretched out for 10 seconds, then 20. It was the loudest admission of guilt I had ever heard. We will take a recess, the mediator said. As everyone stood up, Adrian moved toward me. He looked desperate. Zinnia, he said, his voice cracking. Can I talk to you? Just for a minute. Please. Cassandra stepped in front of me, but I touched her arm. I nodded. 5 minutes, I said. Keep the door open. We stood in the corner of the room, near the window overlooking the gray Chicago street. Adrian looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. He did not see the mouse anymore. He saw the woman who had outgrown him. I did not know, he whispered. The email from Brielle. I didn't know she was playing me. It does not matter, Adrian, I said. It matters to me, he pleaded. He reached out a hand, but stopped short of touching me. Look, I messed up. I got scared. I felt small, and I lashed out. But we can fix this. I can go to therapy. I can sign a postnup. We were good once. Zinnia, remember Seattle. Remember the barn. He was grasping at ghosts. He was trying to leverage nostalgia to save his future. If I change, he said, tears welling in his eyes. If I really change, can you consider taking me back? I can be the husband you need. I can be better. I looked at him. I felt no anger. I felt no triumph. I just felt a profound, exhausting sense of completion. In my profession, Adrian, I said, my voice calm and final, there are some crises that cannot be saved. They can only be contained and shut down. Our marriage is in that kind of crisis. He stared at me, the hope draining from his face. I have finished my part, I continued. I carried the financial load. I carried the emotional load. I carried your ego for 7 years. I am tired. Adrian, and the version of me that needed your approval does not exist anymore. What you think of me, or what you could be for me, has no market value. He stood there, frozen. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He realized, finally, that he wasn't losing a negotiation. He was losing a person who had simply stopped counting him as an asset. We went back to the table. The fight was gone from him. Victor Lane tried to argue for a higher number, but Adrian silenced him with a wave of his hand. He signed the settlement agreement. He accepted the lump sum payment, a fraction of what he had demanded, but enough to keep him from bankruptcy. Then, he signed the NDA. He signed the document that legally barred him from ever discussing Victoria Reyes Containment Group. He signed away his right to claim he had built me. He signed away his voice. The judge stamped the decree. It was done. 7 years of history ended with the scratch of a pen. I walked out of the courthouse and onto the wide stone steps. A small group of reporters was waiting. They shouted my name. Zinnia, is it true you hid millions? How do you feel about the settlement? Is this a victory for women? I paused at the bottom of the steps. I put on my sunglasses. I smiled. But it wasn't for them. Today is not about him, I said to the camera nearest me. Today is the day I signed the last document that tied me to the past. I have a company to run. I stepped into the waiting black car. I did not look back at Adrian, who was coming out of the side exit, alone, dragging his feet. The car drove me to the new offices of VRCG. It was a glass building overlooking Lake Michigan. Steel and light and ambition. I took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened, and the hum of activity filled my ears. Amara was there, standing by the conference room. Inside, 40 employees were waiting. They had a new crisis on the board, a pharmaceutical leak in Boston, but they were waiting for me to lead the strategy. I walked into the room. I took my seat at the head of the table. "Let us get to work," I said. The door clicked shut behind me. It was a solid, heavy sound. It was the sound of a vault closing. Behind that door lay Adrian, and the gossip, and the small life I had lived to make a small man feel big. In front of me was the world I had built with my own hands. The revenge was not the money. It was not a shame. The revenge was that I was about to have the best year of my life, and he would never know a single detail about it. Thank you so much for listening to this story, and I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this tale of ultimate comeback, make sure to subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear Xenia's triumph.